All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I am Nell Shamrell Harrington. I'm a software engineer at Chef who works on Supermarket, and I will be leading this postmortem regarding an error some of our users of the Berkshelf gem saw on October 5th. Normally, we try to complete a postmortem as soon as possible after an outage. This one, unfortunately, was delayed due to me being at reInvent and then at the Chef Summit immediately following. So we are doing the postmortem now. So we are broadcasting this over YouTube, and we also have a Hangout, as you can see going on here. I have sent out the link to YouTube, but if you would like to be involved in the Hangout and join the Hangout and ask questions or participate in it, head on into the Chef IRC channel, that's hashtag Chef, and ask for the link. Rob Kidd, who's another engineer at Chef, will send you the link to the Hangout. Please keep in mind we are limited to only 10 people being in the Hangout simultaneously. And with that, let me start sharing my screen and let's start the postmortem. Oops. Sorry, we just went meta there for a second. One moment. All right, let's get this out of here. All right, so just a reminder, this is a blameless postmortem. We will not focus on past events as they pertain to could have, should have, etc. All follow-up action items will be assigned to a team or individual before the end of the meeting. If the item is to be top priority leaving the meeting, we won't make a follow-up item. So the instant leader in this case was Nell Shamrell Harrington. I received the report of this incident. And in brief, what happened was a piece of code unintentionally included in a release of Reset removed gzip as a registered response. This caused an error to be seen by all users of Berkshelf who had installed it from a gem. Is there anything else we'd like to add to that summary?
I think you mean Ridley, not Reset.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Reset's the person. You are absolutely right. So let's call that Ridley. And
Do we have Jamie on? Was it actually Ridley, Jamie, or was it? I thought it was Berkshelf API gem.
Jamie, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
How about now?
There you go.
There we go.
The description's not exactly accurate.
Okay.
So what happened was a version of Berkshelf API client was depending on a piece, on a module that was located in Ridley. Nobody noticed it before because Berkshelf API client only gets used within the Berkshelf project itself, where Ridley is also present, and due to the way that Ruby applications work, there's no actual linking of dependencies. It's just they all get thrown into a big bucket inside the VM.
Sorry, Jamie, I'm going to ask you to start over again. My computer blipped for a second. I wasn't able to get that down. Can you repeat?
Sure. So what happened was there was a module within Ridley that Berkshelf API client depended on. It was removed from a version of Ridley, and it was internal to Ridley. It was not a public API, which allowed me to bump the version of Ridley, not a major version, because again, it wasn't a public API. Unfortunately, Berkshelf API client was looking for that module still, and it was fixed, but never published to Ruby gems. So installing your dependencies by gem would have resulted in this only.
All right. Does that look about correct?
Berkshelf API client, not Berkshelf API. Not to be nitpicky, they are two different projects.
No problem. All right.
Looks good.
Cool. Anyone else have any input before we move on?
One more. It wasn't part of Ridley's public API. which meant it was safe to remove.
Got it.
And the fix was available in master but was never released.
Yes.
All right.
There you
we
go.
are.
That looks good.
Perfect.
Who's master?
The master branch.
Of Berkshelf? Of Ridley.
Berkshelf API client's master.
Okay.
It looks a lot better.
All right. Excellent. All right. So next up, let me just look at my notes. Let's go through the impacts before we go through the timeline. So I'm going to scroll down here a little bit. So the impact I saw was that all users of the gem installed version of Berkshelf saw a gzip is not registered on Faraday response error when using Berkshelf. Is there a more accurate way of stating the impact, or is there additional impacts that are not there?
I think that's good.
All right.
Agreed.
Cool. All right, so next up, let's go through the timeline. So to note, the time to detect was about 54 minutes. The instance began at 0012 UTC and was resolved at 0044 on that same day. And by UTC time, even though it was Monday Pacific time, by UTC time it had already transferred over to Tuesday on that day. So at 0011, Noah tweeted at me that someone had changed the config on Supermarket and broke Burks. I declared an incident and assumed the role of incident commander. As I'm going through the timeline, if you see anything that's not there or have any edits, just go ahead and jump on in. I replied to Noah's tweet 2 minutes later saying that I was investigating. Then Mark Anderson ran Burks on one of his repos and noticed he was getting that error, the same error that Noah got in his Travis output. I tried running Burks update on one of my repos and did not see the error. Then Dan DeLeo pointed out that Noah or any other user seeing it might be installing Berkshell from a gem and thought that could have newer dependencies than ChefDK. Mark reported that he was seeing the same error when running bundle exec Burks update, but not when running Burks with a ChefDK. And scrolling down a little bit, Dan began looking into whether a recently released library might be breaking anything. He checked 3 and did not see any recent releases. At 0035, I confirmed that no deployments or changes to Supermarket's config had occurred for over a week. Then at 0036, Dan found the line in the Berkshelf API that was likely returning the error. Then Steve and Dana discovered a commit in Ridley, which had appeared to have removed the internal middleware for managing gzip. At 0038, Chris Weber brought Jamie Windsor in, and then at 0044, Jamie yanked the Ridley 4.2.1 gem, and I tweeted the result of that investigation to Noah. Then at 0119 UTC, Jamie released Ridley 4.3.0. Looks like we just had a question about the URL to this document. Currently, this is on a private GitHub repo, but I will make sure to post it on a public GitHub repo and tweet out that link. All right, as for... Oh, whoops. All right, so that was the timeline. And the main thing we'd like to do when we do a post-mortem is want to improve metrics. That means improve the time to detect and time to resolve, though I think it was pretty quick this time.
Before we move on from the timeline, Jamie, do you want to put on when Burks 4.0 was released? I know it was, I think, a couple hours after that.
I didn't do those things to solve the problem. I only did those things to help you. I don't support installing Berkshelf as a gem, but I'll help people out, you know, so it's not really part of the corrective action here.
Okay. All right, so going on to that, or anything else on the timeline before we move on to corrective actions?
Does that make sense to you, Noah, by the way?
Yes, I understand what you said.
No, that's not what I asked.
Anything else regarding this timeline that we just went through? Okay, let's move on to corrective actions. Now, it sounds, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like support for Burkshelf being installed through a gem has been discontinued. Is that correct, Jamie?
Yeah, that was discontinued 2 years ago.
Okay, then it sounds like we need a way to, number one, communicate that out a little clearer, because Noah was not the only one who saw this error, and number two, I don't remember what number two was. So number one, corrective action indicates that installing Burkshelf through a gem is no longer supported. And Jamie, since you're part of the Burkshelf team, can I assign that to you with the caveat we're available to help if you need it?
No.
Okay.
I've communicated this. I don't really know how else to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if it says it on the README at this point, I think that's probably a worthwhile thing. There's probably, as we're kind of getting into some interesting territory here, I think it's probably worth pointing out a couple of things that haven't been mentioned as part of this postmortem that we should all probably take into account. Number one, while Chef is going to do our best as a company to help with Burkshelf because our community depends upon it, it's an open source project that belongs to a person who happens to work at Chef, right? So you get into kind of this weird ground. In fact, there was even an internal discussion as to whether this was an incident or not for that reason, because it isn't software that Chef ships, and it wasn't part of Chef DK, which is something we do ship. So I think there's a fine line as we start to discuss kind of corrective actions. Those corrective actions, we need to make sure they're in the context of things that are appropriate burdens to place upon the individuals involved. And I can't even talk. Remembering that we're all humans and that people are doing the thing that is the best intentioned. But just for clarification, Jamie, since we're on a video and it's an opportunity to continue that clarification, when you say that installing by a gem is not supported, what is the current supported way? Just out of making sure that we're all on the same page.
Absolutely. Chef DK.
Okay.
So the Burkshelf application is packaged in the Chef DK with all of its dependencies, and executing it by its bin stub at depending on what platform you're on, but we'll just say user bin chef or something like that, user local bin chef, or user local bin Burks. That's the way that you want to go about it. If you're executing it from within another Ruby environment, you want to make sure you clear your environment in case bundler's mangling your environment, use Chef DK in your build jobs as well. I think that some of the issue here that I've been hearing is that people are unaware of how to use Chef DK on Travis, and it's my understanding that somebody is working on a blog post right now to help people understand.
I would not say that's the problem. I am well aware of how to use Chef DK. It is not a viable solution for me and many other people.
So Noah, is that because this? So I guess there's a bigger question here, right? Because what I'm hearing you say is that Burkshelf does not solve your problem. I mean, it is kind of the standard way to do this in the community at the moment, but it sounds like you've got your specific use case is not compatible with what Jamie is saying about how to use Burkshelf. Is that?
Yes, that is correct. So just to rewind a little bit, if the only supported mechanism of using Burkshelf is an official Chef Software Incorporated product, and Chef DK is a Chef Software product that is supported by Chef Software, I don't I don't see how we can claim that this is not something that chefs like. You can't have this always. If the only way that you can use this is via ChefDK, that means this is a chef software product at this point. It's a project that is controlled, but like it's controlled by Jamie, but this is entirely being through a gatekeeper of a chef software product.
Well, okay, and I don't disagree with that statement, but you still like it doesn't change the nature of it doesn't change the conversation that's being had, right? Because it would mean that like the supported product is ChefDK, it's not BurkShelf. Does that make sense? So like in that context, if you're executing BurkShelf outside of the context of ChefDK, it becomes like it's a different thing, right? Like ChefDK is I think what I'm saying makes sense. Is there anybody else that's kind of unclear with what is being said?
Basically, I am behind Jamie's desire to distribute applications sanely, because that's a nice thing for him. I would prefer if we could reach a system where BurkShelf is packaged independently of ChefDK, such that I can use BurkShelf in the way Jamie prefers, without being bound by ChefDK as a chef product.
I think that's a reasonable request. What is, just so I understand, the burden of being bound by ChefDK? Like, what is that introducing? Just so I understand.
So I use ChefSpec for testing against multiple Chef versions within Travis. So I need to actually install that version of Chef in a way that ChefSpec can use it, and ChefDK forcibly injects its version of Chef everywhere.
I see. Then yeah, it might be a good idea to have BurkShelf in its own installer instead of the ChefDK.
And we can totally leverage the ChefDK tech and just have like copy and paste the same stuff we were using to package ChefDK to just build a Burks installer that's ChefDK minus everything except Burks. Yeah. For anyone that's watching, the problem here is that it's not a sane way. We need a sane way to do distribution of Ruby applications. And we saw this a number of years ago when Vagrant switched from gem installation, and then BurkShelf did as well, but we just didn't create our own installer. We just piggybacked with the ChefDK. So that is the only way going forward, is bundling this up in an installer. But it's completely possible to do it in another installer as well. I don't have any reservations against that, other than there's more work and release.
Well, and I think there's that really doesn't fit the bar as a corrective action, right? Like we can, the appropriate place for this would be on the feedback site, when we can totally do that.
I disagree there. This is going to happen again.
Well, I understand that, but like at this point, okay. So first off, someone's got an echo going on, just as a heads up. Okay, let's take a step back. Using ChefDK, BurkShelf outside of ChefDK is it is an unsupported thing. Mm-hmm. So what you're trying to do, Noah, while it makes a lot of sense, is basically this piece of software is unsupported in the context that you are attempting to use it. Mm-hmm. At this point in time, no one that's on this call, and even if anyone on this call had the ability to commit those resources, it's outside of the scope of a corrective action. Like a corrective action should be something we are going to do immediately and can do immediately, and building a separate BurkShelf installer and all of the implied bits there of shipping BurkShelf completely separately. Number one, I'm not comfortable asking Jamie to commit to that. Mm-hmm. Number two, from a perspective of Chef software, like it's not a corrective action, right? Like we can't, it's not something I can just like snap my fingers and make a thing. So to me, it's a separate problem. Like when we really dig into what's going on here, right, is on Travis, given a version of Chef that's not included in ChefDK, you are unable to run your tests. And for me, like, and this it pains me to say what I'm about to say, but like at some level, well, then you're either going to need to like handle these kinds of broken things when you run Burkshelf in an unsupported manner, or you're going to have to run use something other than Burkshelf to do the thing, right? And like I hate to say that, but at this point, like those are the only realistic options given this particular situation, because it's, while we declared an incident, we treated it as an incident because we wanted to take care of things. Had Jamie not been an employee of Chef, it would have been, in fact, frankly, the fact that he was an employee of Chef just made it easier for me to get a hold of him because it was via Slack instead of IRC, right? And it's still an open source project. It's still separate from Chef, as far as I understand. Now, it's entirely possible I'm wrong on that. But as far...
Go ahead, whoever just started to speak. Unless I'm hearing things. Which
Sorry,
is
I coughed, and I think that
okay.
The box.
So yeah, like I think to call that a corrective action would be unrealistic and is beyond the scope of this document and this process. Not to say that it's not something we shouldn't consider, and I totally so I think what I'm going to suggest is the corrective action is that someone, and I think it should be Noah just because he's got the best context around it, but if it needs to be me, I will do that for sure. Someone should submit a suggestion to feedback.chef.io to create a separate installer for Burks to allow proper testing of older versions of supported Chef.
There are other options also, I should state.
Yeah.
Like, we could try to, for instance, the way the app bundler builds out bin stubs, we could try to come up with a way to make that a little bit more flexible so that I can use parts of the bin stubs but not all of it. For example, I know Lamont has been looking at the rebundler stuff, which would allow me to install ChefDK and then install a new version of Chef and regenerate all the bin stubs. So that is potentially a less impactful option going forward. But I think we should definitely come up with a formal description of this use case, because it pains me how much I am one of the few people that actually like tests cookbooks on old versions of Chef. That is a thing I wish more people were doing, because it's a thing that the community uses.
No, that makes sense. And so the other thing that occurs to me is there an RFC here, right? Like, I will admit, I am much more a user of Chef than a developer of Chef at this point in my life. So I wonder if there is some sort of RFC hiding deep down inside here that will allow this to be better handled. Thoughts on that?
I think it's more of a user story than an RFC. Like the changes that need to be made are relatively small one way or another, but the important thing is the use case and figuring out how to deal with that.
Two things that we have here. I'm sorry, Neil.
No, go ahead, Jamie.
The two things that we have here are one, which you've already addressed, which is the education needs to be more prolificated. I don't know. I'm not good at the words today, but we need to make sure people understand. And it was 2 years ago that I started telling people to use ChefDK, and that this wasn't a way that we would support it. But that's not enough, because people follow by example, and we have a lot of cookbooks at Chef, for example, which don't use the ChefDK in their build jobs, and then we have customers or users like Noah who have an actual issue with using ChefDK, not just a knowledge issue. It is the right way to move forward, packaging Burkshelf up in an installer or in the ChefDK, and there are different ways we can resolve it. But I'd like to hear if there's anybody else that has problems other than Noah, because this is the right way moving forward, and Noah might not be the only one that's having a problem. Noah's problem might not be the only one that exists. So if there's some way that we can gather that feedback, that would also be very useful. Like Noah said, there's more than one way to accomplish this. We don't, to solve his problem, which is a real problem, we don't just need to put Burkshelf in its own installer. There could be something like RVM for ChefDK. There could be a number of different approaches that we could take. So we should see what the best approach is.
I think I'm starting to hear the RFC hiding deep inside, and that is that should we start an RFC around how do we test? What's the best way to test things in older versions of Chef?
I would modify to just say multiple versions of Chef.
Right.
I mean, it's worth noting also, right? So we have like the workflow RFC, and that just states, you know, these things are supported at this level. Likewise, there's one for platforms. It's definitely a thing. So one proposed solution is to make it nicer to change versions of Chef within ChefDK. Right, and that's cool. But I think that would end up being, for me at least, somewhere in between. Like fully supported, it's a Sev 1 if it's breaking, and like unsupported, go away. But that would be a thing that we could clarify via the RFC process.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because an RFC doesn't necessarily need to indicate it doesn't necessarily need to indicate a technical change to any of the code. It may just be a kind of a guidance document as to how we do this.
All right, so that honestly sounds like, I think the most reasonable corrective action is to start that RFC on how to test using multiple versions of Chef and start the discussion there on what the best technical solution might be for that.
Yeah.
All right, so next question is who wants to take on that corrective action?
I will.
Okay, I will assign that to you.
Thanks, Noah.
Thank you for taking that on, Noah.
And, all right, any other corrective actions that we should consider? Okay, so going back up, we already discussed the contributing factors, timeline, description. I think that's about it for this post-mortem. I'm going to unshare my screen. Let's go meta. And anything else that anyone else wants to cover regarding this incident specifically while we're all still on the line?
There was one comment that we could note that per Jamie's comment that a lot of the historical cookbook examples are show basically using things in a world of using gems, not ChefDK. The current efforts from the cookbook engineering team to start getting cookbooks tested around ChefDK and having examples that people can work off of.
Yeah, there's a very, very massive effort watching that go on.
Right, and more will be revealed on that. All right, one last bit. Anything else?
Yeah, when you use the ChefDK, testing your cookbooks is faster on Travis, so there's that.
Okay.
It is a better world in the end. So there's a little bit of pain moving at first, especially if there's no good examples. But as soon as we have this RFC completed, it's going to be a hell of a lot better for people.
That's factually incorrect.
Can you tell us what the correct interpretation of that is, Noah?
Travis has their own caching system that integrates with Bundler that is significantly faster than installing the ChefDK. ChefDK stuff is hosted on Package Cloud, whereas the Bundler stuff is hosted on a local S3 instance that's next to the Travis workers.
Duly noted.
Super zippy.
Cool. Well, thank you for that correction, and I'm going to defer further conversation on that to the RFC. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everyone very much for their time. Thank you, everyone who's watching on YouTube, and let's keep on moving forward. Thank you very much.